bituminous roadways yesterday. We had some people from, several of us were there. I've learned a lot about the transportation system, about the technology of bituminous roadways, and I've been hinted at about the battle between concrete and blacktop, which I don't know very much about. I'd like to learn more. But I don't really want to say very much about funding or anything like that because I feel I don't have much right to an opinion at this point, so I'm still learning more.
And I'm Andrea Todd Harlan. I am running for state representative in 51A, which is where we're sitting right now. That's Eagan and Northern Burnsville. And as many questions as you all may have for us, I think watching this presentation, I have just as many for you. I think I have a healthcare background. And I think one of our problems with healthcare is it's such a complicated topic, and it's not very sexy. And I think transportation is the same way. It's a really complicated topic, everything from funding, at the city and the county and the state level, and how we can solve the problems that we face every day to make sure that we are maintaining our roads and moving our people and moving our goods. So I look forward just to a continued conversation at all different levels. And really listen and hear what people who are on the front lines of transportation are saying every day.
I'm Jen Wilson. I am the challenger in the race in 51B, which is the eastern portion of Eagan. I have to congratulate Andrea on, I think she's the first in all these forums we've been at to use the word sexy. So, a little chuckle out of that.
Is that a word I should use?
Yeah.
We'll make a point of inserting it here and there in future gatherings. But it's transportation, as Andrea said, it is such a very complicated issue, and it's been a pleasure to hear a bit more. I do apologize, I had another engagement, so I was a little bit late, but I look forward to connecting with many of you outside of this group. I think it's something that we certainly need to make sure is a priority. I don't know that that's been the case recently, so I hope that moving forward it can get the attention that it deserves.
I'm Sandra Mason, and I represent 51A, which is most of Eagan, west of 35E, and all of northern Burnsville. Currently, I do sit on both the Transportation Finance, and I'm Vice Chair of Transportation Policy Committee in the House. And I am well aware of many of the problems that we have. And while I've been talking at the doors and just saying what a tremendous privilege it has been to be part of the legislature, we accomplished a lot over the last 2 years. Obviously, we did not get the comprehensive transportation bill that we wanted out of the House during the past session. I'm looking forward to doing that. And that's been my wish list, that if people didn't have issues, please tell every legislator, every governor, the governor, that you are willing to put forward whatever it takes to get us a transportation system that truly works and is going to work for us in the future. And it was mentioned before, NINDOT has projects going out 20 years. This shouldn't be acceptable. It certainly isn't safe. And I can tell you, we're just talking figures here, but when I'm in committee, I am hearing about people that are dying on the rivers. And every time that happens, you wonder what you could have done differently to get something done for the roads. So again, it's not efficient, it's not safe. We need to be doing much better, and that's what I'm looking forward to accomplishing next year, because it does seem we've got an incredible amount of momentum going and a number of groups that are going to be willing to support us.
Hi, I'm Lori Halverson, and I'm the state representative for Eagan's District 51B, so I represent the opposite side of Sandy's district. And I've had great pleasure in getting to work on transportation issues in my first term at the Capitol. It's not an area I came to with a lot of experience, but boy, there's a lot of people willing to help us learn, and our Dakota County partners, our commissioners, have been wonderful partners. One of the things that we worked on to make sure was happening was working on a little bit more fairness in funding. And so the leased vehicle sales tax, as many of you know, Dakota County wasn't quite getting a fair shake in that deal, and we worked to bring those dollars back into Dakota County, and we were able to bring $13 million back into Dakota County, working unrelentingly with our House Transportation Chair. At one point, he looked at me, he said, "I get nervous when I see you Dakota County people standing over my desk." So, we were strong advocates for Dakota County. It's very clear that, our needs are not keeping pace. And what I'm advocating for is that 2015 is gonna be the session of transportation. So get ready to be in the middle of the excitement of the 2015 session, everybody. Because we need to have a statewide conversation about what our transportation system looks like. We need to have a conversation that's going to include all our stakeholders. I think there's a little disconnect with some of our business community, but here in Eagan, I'm home to lots of trucking companies, right? And they know the imperative that is to have good roads so they can get their goods to market. They know the imperative of having cars sitting in traffic, sitting in gridlock, blocking up our roads. And so we're really talking about creating a vision as a state moving forward. And part of that vision for me that I'll be advocating for, if I'm lucky enough to go back to the Capitol, is making sure that our Dakota County has a strong voice in that issue, because we are growing and changing very rapidly. And the Dakota County that we were planning for 20 years ago is not the Dakota County that we're going to be planning for 20 years from now. And we need to keep pace and we need to innovate. So I'm ready to get to work.
I'm Mike, we'll get the federal side over here. Way more exciting. I'll just thank you so much for the opportunity to come and talk with this group and to see the facts and materials that you presented already today, which is really important for us to understand. Because I think what those graphs show, especially from the federal perspective, is we've got a lot of work to do if we're going to invest in the kind of transportation system that we really want in the 21st century. I had the pleasure of serving Eagan, and I still live here in the state legislature for a couple of years, and I got a chance to go up and actually was the chief author on the Complete Streets bill and helped put some bonding in place for in order to have interchanges that are safe here in the county and across what is this now the second congressional district. And understand really the importance of making sure that we've got partnerships up and down the line. But more importantly, from our federal level all the way down to our local level. There's a couple of points that just really jumped out at me tonight. First is we've got great roads here in Eagan and Dakota County, and people are used to them being that way, and as a result, it's difficult for them to see the actual impact of what will happen if we don't have it. So what I didn't hear in the presentations tonight was, boy, what happens if what it looks like 10 years from now if we don't make these investments? It looks pretty scary, and a lot more people who think transportation funding ought to be a higher priority. That's one of the things that you've done really well is to keep these roads great, but it makes it a harder sell for making the next big investment. And the second thing is, I think, really is whether we're talking about short-term planning or long-term planning. We've got just far too many people in our, at least on the federal level, who can't see past that next election to make decisions. And we need in transportation funding not to be looking out 10 years or 20 years, but to be looking out 50 and 100. That's how long that you saw from those charts, that we want these roads and bridges and infrastructure pieces to be able to last. And so what do we need 50 years from now? What are we going to want 100 years from now? That's we have to have people out there who can step back and have that vision going forward and be a partner up and down the ticket. And I think that is really what I'm looking for, the opportunity to do, and get a chance to serve in Congress in a couple of years.
Paul Overby, I'm also running for U.S. House in this district, representing Dakota County. I'd love to talk about all the wonderful changes that are going to happen when I get to Washington. I prefer to talk about what I think is realistic. People are losing faith in Washington, obviously. With respect to transportation, we're seeing the same issues that we're seeing at the state level. We have a federal highway system that's exhausted. We have a federal highway transportation fund that's exhausted. We see really little activity on that. Beyond that, I do agree that what we need really is comprehensive policy planning. And when you look at the federal level, we're also talking about issues of rail, navigable waters, air transport, FAA. All those things have a major impact on how we move commerce in this state, and in terms of how we plan for moving commerce in the future. We look at the intense problems that we're dealing with right now in the southern part of our district, trying to get crops to market. Those are perishable goods and they can't wait. And yet most of the rail capacity is being used by oil. Those are federal issues.
question that I like to ask everybody has to do with your interest in being a champion for transportation. One of the things that you've heard a lot about, transportation sometimes struggles to get a lot of attention, and there are a lot of competing issues at the legislature. So one of the questions I have is, would you be interested in serving on the Transportation Committee if you were elected? Would you advocate for transportation funding with your caucus? And are there any options that you're opposed to, that you just would not consider or support in terms of funding? So I'm going to start here again, and anybody who wants to jump in, you don't have to answer the question, but we're going to give everybody a chance to. So if you want to start.
I think I heard two questions there.
Yes.
One is, would I be interested in serving on the Transportation Committee and be a champion for building roads, bridges, transit things? The second question is, what was the second question?
Are there any funding options that you're opposed to?
Funding options I'm opposed to. The answer to the first question is yes, of course. If I can serve to make frugal, efficient use of taxpayer dollars to give the taxpayers what they need, then absolutely, that's what I'm there as a representative to do. The gas tax clearly is not working as intended. However, it is something that I think meets a principle, which is user pays. We want, for instance, heavy trucks do a lot more damage to the roads than automobiles. And principle says those heavy trucks should pay more because they do the most damage to the roads. Those sorts of principles need to guide tax policy, and the gas tax does a pretty decent job of that. Maybe it needs some tweaks, but it does a pretty decent job. However, I don't consider myself a champion of transit. I consider myself a champion of the taxpayer's wallet. And it's easy to make a case, or I shouldn't say it's easy. There are lots of needs. Econ 101 says needs are infinite, resources are always finite. And the job is to make the best possible use and meet the most needs with what's available. And what's available is always limited. So that's always a struggle, it's always really hard. I'm really glad to see a room full of people who are doing that work, doing the hard job of allocating those funds and making the best possible use of taxpayer funds. So, and if I have a role in supervising that and making it better, absolutely.
Usually when you run for office, people ask you what your top 3 issues are, and I always say I can't just do 3, I do 4. And transportation is one of the 4 because we are growing and changing so much in this district that I'm running in Northern Dakota County. So now that I know that Dakota County is known for being troublemakers, now I really want to be on the Transportation Committee. But as far as looking at funding sources, I think that when we look at transportation being 0.6 of the general fund, that's a pretty small slice of the pie. And we need to look at that and prioritize for our roads and our bridges. So when we talk about different revenue sources, let's look at what we're bringing in for transportation and what we're using it for. Prioritize, as Don said, about where are we spending our money. We're representing every taxpayer in the state of Minnesota when it comes to a topic like this, and making sure we're using our dollars wisely. And then I do know that Wisconsin and Iowa have talked about reform, moving from a flat gas tax to a sales tax type model. I would only really consider something like that if I feel we've expended some other options first.
I think you mentioned that maybe priorities, and has transportation been a priority? And I think that probably the answer is that it has not. With regard to funding, I think that absolutely I would say I would be a champion for transportation with kind of the caveat that it needs to be efficient and effective and cost-effective transportation and flexible, quite frankly. I think we have a very dynamic Twin Cities metro area, and you're seeing that expanding. We also have a lot of agriculture and industry and manufacturing in greater Minnesota. so I think we need that flexibility as to be part of the equation with regard to thought of how the dollars are placed. Modes of transportation that can be changed, that can be adjusted along with our sort of infrastructure that's in place now. So really, I think that it's about prioritizing the spending, prioritizing where those dollars are going within the existing revenue pool. Andrea, I think, mentioned sales tax, and I think one option would be to not necessarily raise the sales tax, but dedicate a portion of the statewide sales tax to go toward transportation. I think there are ways that we can look at, I mean, it includes efficiencies, which of course would amount to probably a pretty small portion, but within existing streams of revenue, making sure that transportation is a priority because it is a need. And that's what I would support.
Transportation impacts every facet of our life, whether it's moving people to work, to jobs, to schools, whatever, or moving the freight, the things that we consume. It's incredibly important. It impacts how much we pay, it impacts just a whole lot of different areas, so I think it's incredibly important. And my interest has been in transportation ever since I served on the Eagan Council, and Mayor Eagan appointed me to the Minnesota Valley Transit Authority. So I'm very, very dedicated to improving our public transit. And this is something that we really, in Minnesota, we need to be doing a better job. We are losing the competition with other states, so that needs to be happening. But most importantly, next year, what needs to happen is we need to have a bipartisan solution for a comprehensive transportation system. And there aren't many things that I would rule out at this point. We need to come to a bipartisan solution. That is the end of this story.
I've been a champion for transportation for Dakota County for a number of reasons. I mean, it impacts our economy so greatly in Dakota County and in my district in Eagan. It's also been something that I've been hearing about at the doors. And I think when you're getting into policy areas like transportation I hope you guys are all really excited that my constituents are talking about transportation needs at the door. People are feeling the need, people are feeling the pinch, and people understand the way that we've gotten the short shrift in transportation over the past decade, because we have kicked the can down the road. We have not kept pace with even our needs, and we're on pace to have 2,000 miles of roads that we're going to need to repair. I mean, that's really a scary proposition if we don't take action. I have had the Commissioner Deli out to see Eagan. I can tell you, Eagan tells a great transportation story. We're moving goods to marketplace. We're doing bus rapid transit. We've got businesses here in Eagan that are saying, I need ways for my employees to get to work because they're trying to attract the best and the brightest, and not everybody's got reliable transportation to get to work, or they're stuck on the road. Whatever the case may be. And so we're really talking about the way that our economy is going to grow in the next 2 decades. And that's why transportation is so important. In addition to the commissioner, the speaker's been out here to see our roads and the way we all come together. He said to me one time, what is it about Eagan? I said, haven't you heard all roads lead to Eagan? The governor's office has been out to talk to our trucking companies. I happen to champion for transportation. I talk to our transportation chair probably on a weekly basis, telling him what I'm hearing at the doors, because I keep saying I want to be ready when we start in January. I want to hit the ground running, because this is going to be an important statewide conversation that we need to have. And I told him I want to be ready for me because I'm really excited about this, and I told him I'm very interested in sitting on transportation finance in the next session. So let's go.
Well, I'll just say I think rebuilding the middle class is job number 1, and we're not going to rebuild the middle class unless we put pieces in place that help make sure you get a strong middle class. And transportation is a big aspect of that. Making sure that these businesses in Eagan and across the state and across the country have an opportunity to move their goods to market, to get up and down the river, to get across the rail is really crucial to the future of rebuilding the middle class. And so that'll be definitely a primary focus of mine. I don't know whether I'll end up on a transportation related committee in the House or not. It'll have an impact. I didn't sit on any of the transportation committees when I served in the State House either, but I did have an impact on transportation policy, and did have an opportunity, because people who want to have an impact, positive impact, can do that at any level, and I'll definitely take advantage of that opportunity. I think it's really important, though, to think about, in terms of our transportation, from the federal perspective, we're largely in the Capitol building. We build stuff, we don't pay for stuff that gets built, as opposed to the maintenance work that, leaders that we saw today have so much to deal with. They have to deal with the maintenance and the cleaning and keeping the roads, passable. And we've really dropped the ball, I think, on the federal side of this. I will confess, I favor dramatically increasing our fuel efficiency standards, and that's only going to put more pressure on the gas tax, because hopefully we're going to be using a lot less gas. And so I really favor moving beyond the gas tax as a funding source. And I think we have to think about making sure we're putting the right piece of infrastructure in the right place. Bus rapid transit up Cedar Avenue was a fabulous place to do that. Didn't have the capacity to do light rail, but we did have good demand. We're exceeding demand there, and that's perfect. There might be places like the Robert Street corridor where it worked a long time with some groups of coalition members to try to get that corridor even on the map, and now it's on the map, and we're talking about what infrastructure piece goes there. Probably doesn't fit well with commuter rail, but it might work fine for bus rapid transit, or it might work fine for an LRT, who knows, we'll have to look that through. But putting the right piece in the right place is really crucial to going forward, and that's one of the things I'll really focus on when I'm in Congress.
I think the federal government puts together a lot of policy and legislation and rules that really impede local community, small business, independent farmers, local government. I think for the future, we need to really restore more control to our local communities, our local state government, and I think that's the direction we need to move in with Washington. You look at education as another example. We've already talked about transportation at the federal level. Education is the same example. They put together all these rules and policies, and there's no funding. 1% of the discretionary budget goes to education. The states are handling these things, and we need to give the states control over these issues, and local government, county commissioners. And I think my principal role in Washington would be to advocate for those policy changes, to coordinate with local and state government to create that transition and make Minnesota competitive with other states. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so I think we have time for a question or two if anybody wants to throw one out. Anybody? Keith.
You saw, particularly with Mark's presentation, the balance, or frankly the imbalance in last year's bill between transit funding and highway funding. Has been acknowledged here several times. Highways are a necessary component of transit, given our continual reliance on buses. Can you give us your thoughts on what that balance should be relative to what it was in your legislation considered last year?
Whoever wants to jump in.
I'll jump in. I agree with you completely on the fact that there was an imbalance and there has been an imbalance, and that our roads are really key to effective transit, especially when we're looking at the way that we're expanding transit in Dakota County, and what our businesses are looking for in Dakota County as well. They're looking for folks to have the ability to access transit to get to work. They're looking for people to access transit to get out of the way so we can get our goods to market. And so roads are really have been neglected for years. We obviously haven't been keeping up with pace with repair, with construction, with inflation. And if we sit on this any longer, it's going to cost us more money. For all the talk of efficiency that we hear over and over, all we need is efficiency in our system. Sitting on this another year is going to cost us millions of dollars. There's some efficiency we can build into the system right here by taking action. And so the other thing I think that's really important, and again, I talk truckers a lot because it's a really important part of the economy in my district. But it's not just roads in Dakota County, it's what does our statewide system look like? How do we move these goods statewide? And so it's a huge priority for me.
And I would like to just answer to that as well. Dakota County, because of its needs of roads, we need to be able to spend more money on that. And I think what I think you were referring to is the tax, where there was going to be an additional tax, but I think we need to allow the counties more flexibility in the additional tax. It can't all be going to transit. And that's something that we need to be working on. And that also needs to be balanced also between rural and the metro area. I mean, we need to be balanced in how we're doing this statewide. And that's an incredibly important thing. And again, that goes back to having a bipartisan solution for stable funding.
I guess Representatives Halverson and Mason, with their party being in the majority and really in control of our state government, I'm not sure why, if roads and bridges were a priority, that they weren't prioritized in our last legislative cycle. But I believe it's close to 90% of people go to and from work using roads, and about 66% of goods are transported using roads. And those numbers are pretty powerful. Now, do we need to have a long-term plan? Absolutely. But when you look at those numbers, I think that needs to guide the prioritization with regard to funding. What's going to be utilized by the most people? Where do we get the return on investment? And that's what I would suggest we look at moving forward.
Yeah, the imbalance was a concern for me, and I echo what Jen said, that there was single party control. So bipartisan effort wasn't even needed. They could have done it. Furthermore, in the bonding bill, they spent more money on the Senate office building than they did on roads and bridges. So going forward, it's exactly what Jen said. Over 90% of people use roads and bridges. And we spent billions of dollars on light rail. I like looking at bus rapid transit. It's worked well in this area. Bus rapid transit can change with our population centers and our workforce. And it gives us more flexibility to suit the needs of the people in this district and around the metro area, and making sure that we're also funding our greater Minnesota projects as well. We can't ignore greater Minnesota any longer.
I hate to pile on, but there's a lot of talk today about priority for roads and bridges, yet the legislature has been spending billions on things like light rail, trains, those sorts of things that clearly are not economically advantageous. There are numerous studies out there saying that each ride on the Green Line costs the taxpayer $6 or $10, I don't remember the numbers. A while back, the North Star line, there was a study that said for the money we spent on that, we could give every rider a brand new Prius. Now this makes very little sense. If roads and bridges are the priority and we're short on money, we should prioritize and we should put it where it belongs. I want to go back to another point too, just briefly. There's talk of using the sales tax and the income tax to fund roads. That has one big negative, and that is if we're looking for stable revenue, that's the wrong place to look, because that's the most volatile that you get. There's a lot to be said for revenue sources that are stable from year to year, and that's not it.
We'll make additional
Could you repeat the question?
Well, it's more a state budget question. So
Yeah, I think it's more of a state. Yeah. Stephanie, did you want to, final question?
My name is Stephanie Mason. I'm the field director from Minnesota. We're a coalition working to address the transportation needs in Minnesota next year at the Capitol. And in regards to the last question, it referred to the bill that worked partway through committee, which did focus on new revenues as well. And I know we talked a little bit about the disparity in terms of how that money was allocated in the bill. But my question would be, would you support new revenues at the Capitol to help address these needs? And are you open to the idea of attacking the solution with new revenues involved.
I think I answered that a little bit in my comment earlier, where I want to look at the budget, as I mentioned. You know, we've got the highway user tax fund, but we're also not making transportation a priority in our general fund. So I want to look and make sure that we're allocating our dollars towards transportation with revenue streams that we're currently seeing at the state, before we address new revenue streams. But should we accomplish that first half, I wouldn't be opposed to looking at reforming our gas taxes as Margaret had discussed in her presentation.
I would tend to agree with that. I think that, first and foremost, we have to look at prioritizing transportation needs with a long-range goal before looking for bringing in additional revenue. We are not really giving it its due right now, and I think that that's something, and particularly within the transportation piece of the pie, also looking at where that money's going and making sure that it's going, as I said before, to areas that are going to bring the most return on investment, that are not going to be costly down the road, that are going to be able to be utilized by many people, that are going to have some flexibility with regard to public transit, such as with our buses, where bus routes can be changed and moved, versus things that are very expensive, and once they're in place, they're there, and those costs continue down the road. So I think looking at within the transportation piece, how it's allocated, and then within the overall budget, both with regard to general fund and also with bonding, making sure that transportation is a priority.
I would like to disagree just a little bit about some of the comments. We did invest a lot of money in transportation last year. We did put money into Corridors of Commerce, and that was meant, Corridors of Commerce is meant to help communities who understand the need for their area, whether it's a chamber, businesses, citizens at large. These people want to get something done. So that's, I thought, was really important. We had bonding, and I had a bill in there where we will have money for the overpass over here. So we spent considerable amount of money. But I want to go back a little bit to 2008 when we did the last comprehensive transportation bill. And again, it wasn't as much as we would have liked to have had. I remember I was hoping for a 10-cent increase in gas tax at that point. The best we could do was 5 cents. We have, this is again a number of years later. We need additional funding. I mean, that is what the problem is. You can only spend so much. We need sustainable funding. We also need to be addressing some of the things like the efficiency of the gas tax. We know that with the additional, more vehicles that are using less fuel, et cetera, that's important. So we need to look at different ways of funding. There's a number of different proposals on the table, but it is important that people understand it's not about setting priorities of what you have. We are behind in virtually every aspect. We do need more money. Prices are going up, and that is the problem. And until we understand that, we're not going to make progress. And I do want to mention, I was talking to someone who does a lot of consulting on an international basis, and he is really concerned about the lack of future planning done in this country compared to other countries. I mean, we need to be thinking ahead 10, 20 years, and we can't do that if we're going to be tied down to 2-year budgets.
Well, it's clear that we want to make transportation a priority, and the charge that we didn't make transportation a priority is to me a little bit off base. It's a lot off base, frankly. We are making up for 12 years of neglect in our state government. We're making up for 12 years of neglect in our education system, for monstrous cuts to our health and human services system that was having a huge issue, creating huge dangers and problems for our people with disabilities, communities with disabilities, nursing homes that are very often the largest employer in small communities. There are big issues to tackle in this state. And to say we're going to tackle them all in 2 years and we've got all the answers and we're going to make it all happen, that's not realistic. We have to come to the table together and come up with a comprehensive plan. And that's why 2015 is going to be so crucial and so important. 2013, I say, was a session of education. We have big work to do to pay back a $2.8 billion deficit to our schools that past legislature has borrowed. And we really need to, and we created a comprehensive plan for funding our education. And guess what? Our education system is solvent. Guess what? Our budget is balanced. So now we can take a look at what Minnesota's future is all about. Instead of planning for the next budget crisis, we're now in a position to plan for Minnesota's future and to create a vision of a state that really works. And that's why I'm so happy that we're in this position, because we have big issues to tackle, and transportation is absolutely at the top of the list. Revenues for transportation, I kind of keep getting this feeling that people think that's kind of a big slush fund of money and it just goes hither and yon. You guys know more than anybody that transportation has some really strongly dedicated streams of revenue. It's different than a lot of the other ways that we budget in Minnesota. And not only that, but we've got federal and county and local governments that are working together to build this system. And so with these dedicated taxes, dedicated dollars, we have to make sure that they're distributed appropriately. We have to make sure that our suburbs like Dakota County are getting what we need from our system. But we also have to come together as communities and recognize where we have fallen short over the past decade. We fell off a transportation cliff in 2008, and it took an override of a governor's veto to move Minnesota forward. It was very, very tough debate, and it was tough on a lot of legislators who were leading for their communities and were punished for their votes. That's why a bipartisan plan, getting together and visioning as a state is vitally important, and I'm ready to do that work.
I'd say from the federal perspective, we've got serious deficits coming in the future here, as those charts show it. And there's really only a handful of ways you can deal with it. You can limit your projects you're going to do, your capital investment going forward to the dollars that we have coming in, which is going to be dramatically, which will dramatically reduce the number of projects that can be built and the expansions that are needed. You can raise the gas tax, get about, each penny gets you about $1.5 billion a year, so you can raise that, probably need 10 or 15 cents in the next 10 years to catch up and be where we want to be, just to kind of maintain where we're going. Or you can do, I guess, some sort of a general fund match, or where you start sucking money out of the general fund and start putting it into this instead of having dedicated user fees, or, you know, some combination of those things, I suppose, would be an option as well. Right now, we're limping along. We aren't planning for the future. We're doing little short fixes. We got, you know, basically through till May, or March, rather, federal dollars that we've been able to start doing allocations on. You know, I think it's 2015, most of the gas tax goes away if we don't do some legislative action on that. We should be planning out a lot longer, a lot bigger vision to give most of the people in this room a little better planning, know what the budgets look like over the next 5 years. And you can't do that with the people we've got in Congress right now, in large part because they are more interested in the fight than the solution. I will be more interested in the solution.
Yeah, I mean, talk about the budget crisis for 12 years in Minnesota. I mean, that's what the federal government is. We got $1 trillion in student loan debt. We got 17 trillion federal deficit. We have a $50 billion a month trade deficit. It's chaos. And a lot of things need to change before we're going to see any significant changes in Washington. Yes, I could go through a whole list of things that we could do or should do. There's lots of policy positions out there. The question is, what can we do? And how do we respond to this chaos? And how do we be successful and move forward as a state? And what can our federal representatives do to facilitate that? That's what's important. That's what's critical right now. And
I think I get the last word on this one. I got
Okay.
skipped. Anytime you hear people talk about priorities, and everything seems to be priority, the real answer is there are no priorities. We should all be very suspicious of that. Any conversation that starts by saying, will you raise taxes, has it exactly backwards. The way this should work is we need to determine the needs and then make the case for the taxation to pay for it. That's exactly what this room is full of. It's full of presentations about the needs and what the needs are, how big they are, why they are. That is the conversation to have. If that case is well made, taxpayers pay for it. They'll support it. We have to, and that's what our job as politicians is to make that case for that taxation. But I think it needs to be done in the right order. So this is a wonderful gathering, and I'm glad we're here.